All right, let's get into something weird. And I mean that in the best way possible. Today, we're decoding a really fascinating system for understanding our minds in this digital age. It's called the Khaeos Protocol, and it's this wild mix of a psychological tool and an internet art project. Okay, let's dive right in.
So let's kick things off with a pretty big question. You know that feeling of fate? Like you're stuck on autopilot, just doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over? Well, what if that wasn't some big mystical force? What if fate was just a bug, a technical glitch in the code that runs you? Hold that thought, because it is the key to basically everything we're about to unpack.
First up, we gotta understand the problem this protocol is even trying to solve. And honestly, it's a feeling I think we all know too well. The crisis of the modern mind. That constant low-level hum of being completely and utterly overwhelmed.
As the Khaeos Protocol sees it, this crisis is coming at us from two directions. Internally, we're all dealing with our own private anxieties and traumas. And externally, we're trying to navigate a digital world that's just gotten so strange. It's this landscape of uncanny, dreamlike nostalgia that always feels like it's about to break. It's our inner chaos crashing right into a glitchy, haunted internet.
So how in the world do you deal with that? Well, this is where the protocol proposes a radical idea. It says, hey, let's stop treating these as philosophical problems and start treating them as technical ones by viewing your mind as an operating system.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. It takes these old-school psychological concepts and gives them a modern tech spin. You know Carl Jung's idea of the shadow? All those repressed, hidden parts of yourself? Well, here, it's redefined as legacy code. Think of it like old, janky software from your childhood. It's poorly documented, probably insecure, but it's still running in the background with total admin control over your entire system.
And if the shadow is just old code, then what's fate? Well, that's what happens when that code runs automatically. The protocol calls this telemetry latency. It's the measurable time gap between an event, a trigger, and your conscious awareness of that trigger. If you've already reacted before you even realize you were triggered, you're not in control. The machine is running you.
This table is basically the Rosetta Stone for this entire system. It creates a direct one-to-one map. The ego, your conscious self, that's the control plane. You're the administrator. The vast unconscious is the data plane, where all the raw, chaotic processes are running. The shadow is that buggy legacy code. And an emotional trigger, that's just a high-entropy input, a messy piece of data that the system has to process.
And this brings us to the central equation of the whole protocol. Now, I know it looks complex, but the idea is actually simple and incredibly powerful. As the latency, that awareness gap, gets closer and closer to zero, what was once fate transforms into agency. True choice, true free will exists in the tiny space you create between a trigger and your reaction.
Okay, so this framework is fascinating, right? But how do you actually use it? How do you start debugging these glitches inside your own head?
The absolute key is understanding the difference between these two layers. The data plane is the storm. Raw emotion, chaos, all the noise. But here's the thing, you are not the storm. You are the control plane, the calm, clinical system administrator whose job is just to watch and log the data without getting swept away. The goal is to always try to operate from this detached perspective.
And here's the practical method. It's called the sandboxing protocol. It's a 4-step process for creating that space for agency. First, you detect it. An emotional process starts spiking. Then, you isolate it. You mentally put it in a sandbox where it can't infect the rest of your system. Third, you log the event like a scientist. Okay, trigger detected, passive-aggressive email, legacy script activated, fear of rejection. And finally, and this is the most important part, you inhibit the automatic reaction. That simple pause is where true choice begins.
Now this is where things get really wild. This intensely personal internal system, well, it doesn't just stay in your head. It actually has a public-facing side that has totally gone viral.
Because this whole framework, this entire operating system for the mind that we've been talking about, it isn't just a metaphor.
It is the literal blueprint for a popular unfiction art project. A project that takes this internal psychological battle and externalizes it as a story about corrupted nostalgia, dreamscapes, and digital ghosts.
The art project even uses a strict visual language, a hex code theology, to signal these psychological states. The deep purple represents data, which is the safe, idealized ego. The piercing cyan represents the glitch, the intrusion of the shadow. And black represents the void, the vast, unknowable unconscious.
And this right here is the project's core genius. The internal battle between your calm, curating ego and your chaotic unconscious is perfectly mirrored by a war between two internet aesthetics. That safe, curated feeling of the ego is represented by vaporwave. You know, those hazy, nostalgic images of 90s malls. The intrusion of the shadow is the glitch, a sudden, jarring blast of weird core aesthetic that corrupts that safe memory.
The project taps into some very specific cultural feelings. Things like anemoia, that strange nostalgia for a time you've never known, like the 90s. It uses hauntology, the sense that our culture is haunted by futures that were promised but never arrived, and it builds its whole atmosphere using liminal spaces, like empty hallways. And canopsia, that unique eeriness of a place that's usually bustling but is now totally abandoned.
Okay, let's move to our final section and see how this all builds into a powerful new idea for dealing with our inner worlds and our outer worlds. So the crucial point is this. The goal of the Khaeos Protocol isn't to delete your legacy code or destroy your inner shadow. It's about a radical act of transformation. It's about taking your personal chaos, your glitches, your anxieties, and turning them into a high-value aesthetic, into a piece of art that is not only meaningful to you, but deeply resonant to others.
This is the motto of the Archivist, the narrator of the art project, and it perfectly summarizes the protocol's shift in mindset. You stop being a victim of your own psychological glitches, and you become a librarian of them. You don't fear the chaos. You observe it, you catalog it, you index it.
Which leaves us with a final thought. What if your glitches, your traumas, your so-called flaws aren't bugs that need to be fixed? What if they're actually features, unique characteristics of your operating system that give you a creative edge? The real question then becomes, what are you building with them?